The stars had watched humanity suffer for 300 years. And the stars had done nothing because stars do not care about the small creatures that crawl beneath them. But humans cared, and humans remembered every single wound that the galaxy had carved into their flesh. Ambassador Alara Vance stood before the Galactic Tribunal with her hands clasped behind her back and her spine as straight as steel. She had stood in this same chamber 417 times before, and 417 times the alien faces staring down at her had said the same word: denied. The tribunal chamber stretched upward for nearly a mile, its walls lined with floating platforms where representatives from 1,000 species watched the proceedings. Most of them had skin that was soft and bodies that were fragile, because most of them came from paradise worlds where the weather was gentle and predators had never evolved. They called Earth a death world, and they were not wrong about that. Alara's homeworld was a place of hurricanes and earthquakes, of venomous snakes and massive predators, of scorching deserts and frozen wastelands. The gravity was crushing, the atmosphere was corrosive with oxygen, and the temperature swings could kill an unprepared alien in hours. When the Concord had first discovered humanity 2 centuries ago, their scientists had been horrified. How could intelligent life evolve on such a nightmare planet, they had asked. How could any species survive childhood on a world that seemed designed to kill everything on it? But humanity had not just survived. Humanity had thrived, and that terrified the Concord more than anything else. The High Arbiter, a pale creature with 12 eyes and no mouth, projected its thoughts directly into Alara's mind. Ambassador Vance, the Tribunal has reviewed your petition regarding human settlement rights on Kepler-7, and we have reached our decision. Alara did not flinch, though she knew what was coming. She had learned long ago that showing emotion to the Concord was seen as weakness, and weakness invited exploitation. The petition is denied, the High Arbiter continued, its mental voice cold and distant. The human population on Kepler-7 will be relocated to the designated containment zones as previously ordered. A murmur rippled through the chamber, and Alara caught the scent of satisfaction from the Velith delegation. The Velith were an ancient species, and they had been the architects of humanity's subjugation from the very beginning. "May I speak?" Alara asked, her voice calm and controlled. The High Arbiter's 12 eyes blinked in sequence. "You may, though the decision is final." Alara turned slowly, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. She saw the Kythari with their delicate wings, the Morthine with their crystalline shells, the Draven with their 4 arms and cruel smiles. All of them had benefited from human labor, human blood, and human sacrifice. 300 years ago, your ships arrived in our solar system, Alara began, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. We welcomed you with open arms and open hearts, because we had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life for as long as we could remember. She paused, and the silence was heavy with tension. What did you give us in return for our welcome? You gave us chains disguised as treaties, and slavery disguised as employment opportunities. You sent our people to die in your mines in your wars, and when we asked for fair treatment, you called us ungrateful. The Velith ambassador, a towering creature covered in golden scales, rose from its platform. The human ambassador speaks out of turn. She does not have permission to make accusations against Concord members. I am not making accusations, Alara replied, and there was something dangerous in her voice now. I am stating facts that are recorded in your own archives. She activated her personal display, and holographic images appeared in the center of the chamber. They showed human workers collapsed from exhaustion and toxic mines. Human soldiers dying by the thousands in battles that were not their own. Human children being taken from their families for forced sterilization programs. Kepler-7 was supposed to be different, Alara continued. You promised us that colony would be our own, that we could govern ourselves and build our own future. My grandmother was one of the original settlers, And she believed your promises. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to continue. Last year, your forces bombed the colony during what you called a military exercise. 200,000 humans died, including my grandmother and my 2 youngest nieces. When we demanded an investigation, you told us it was an unfortunate accident. The chamber was silent now, and even the Velith ambassador had nothing to say. And now you tell us that the survivors must leave their homes, must abandon the graves of their loved ones, must relocate to containment zones where we will be monitored and controlled like dangerous animals. Elara turned back to face the High Arbiter directly. I have spent 20 years in this chamber, asking politely for justice. I have followed every rule and every protocol. I have been patient and reasonable and diplomatic. She smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. Today you will announce Resolution 7412, which declares Earth itself a wildlife preserve and orders all of humanity to relocate to 3 designated containment worlds. I know this because your security is not as good as you think it is. Gasps echoed through the chamber, and the High Arbiter's eyes widened in what might have been surprise. You believe that humanity will accept this, Elara said. You believe that we will bow our heads and shuffle off to our cages like obedient livestock. You believe this because you have never truly understood what we are. She reached up and removed her diplomatic badge, the symbol of her office that she had worn with pride for 2 decades. She held it up for everyone to see, and then she crushed it in her fist. We are Deathworlders, she said, and her voice was like thunder now. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day, and we conquered it. We survived ice ages and plagues and predators that would give your children nightmares. We are not your servants, and we are not your slaves. She let the broken pieces of her badge fall to the floor. We tried peace. We tried diplomacy. We tried patience, and you answered with genocide and slavery and contempt. So now I am going to tell you something that my people have known for 300 years, but were too polite to say. Elara Vance, Ambassador of Earth, looked up at the assembled might of the Galactic Concord, and she spoke the words that would ignite a war. We are done asking. We are done begging. We are done pretending that you will ever see us as equals. You had 300 years to treat us with basic dignity, and you chose cruelty instead. She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Remember this moment, she called over her shoulder. Remember that we gave you every chance to do the right thing. And when your worlds burn and your empires crumble, remember that you chose this. The doors closed behind her, and the Galactic Tribunal erupted into chaos. That night, Elara Vance sat alone in her quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel. She held a communication device in her hands, and she stared at it for a long time before activating it. The message was simple, broadcast on frequencies that only humans could receive, sent to every colony and ship and settlement where her people lived among the stars. We tried peace, she said into the device. They chose otherwise. It is time to remind the galaxy why they should have feared us from the beginning. Across 1,000 worlds, humans heard her words and understood. The patient giant was finally waking, and the galaxy would never be the same again. 6 months passed after Ambassador Vance's declaration, and the Galactic Concord waited for the human uprising that never came. The Velith High Command monitored every human settlement and every human ship. They watched human workers report to their jobs in the mines and factories. They watched human soldiers follow orders without complaint. They watched and they waited, and they saw nothing that suggested rebellion. The Deathworlders have accepted their fate, declared Admiral Devarax of the Velith hegemony. Their ambassador's speech was nothing more than empty bluster from a primitive species that knows it cannot win against our superior forces. The Concord's leadership celebrated their apparent victory. They had expected riots and violence, and instead they had received silence and obedience. Surely, this proved that humans were not as dangerous as the old stories claimed. They were wrong, and their mistake would cost them everything. Deep in the asteroid belt of a distant star system called Gliese 667c, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood in the command center of a facility that did not officially exist. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen far too much suffering. Around her, thousands of humans worked in absolute silence, building weapons and ships and training for a war that had been decades in the making. "Status report," Admiral Chen said to her second-in-command, a tall man named Commander David Okonkwo. "All strike teams are in position across the galaxy," Commander Okonkwo replied. "We have successfully infiltrated 2,000 Concord military installations, 47 shipyards, and the primary communication relay network. The enemy suspects nothing." Admiral Chen nodded slowly, her expression giving away nothing of the weight she carried. For 30 years, she had been preparing for this moment. She had started as a young lieutenant, watching her friends die in Concord wars that had nothing to do with humanity. She had risen through the ranks not through glory, but through careful planning and infinite patience. The secret fleet that surrounded her had taken 2 generations to build. Human engineers had worked in hidden facilities scattered across 100 star systems, constructing warships piece by piece while pretending to manufacture civilian cargo vessels. These ships were nothing like the elegant craft that the Concorde favored. They were ugly and brutal, built from heavy armor and packed with weapons that the Concorde had banned as too destructive. They had no artificial gravity because human bodies could handle the strain. They had minimal life support because human lungs could survive on less oxygen than any other species. They were ships designed by Deathworlders for Deathworlders, and they were ready for battle. "What about the communication network?" Admiral Chen asked. Commander Okonkwo smiled grimly. "Our people have been working as maintenance technicians on the relay stations for years. When we give the signal, we can shut down Concorde communications across half the galaxy. It was a plan that no other species could have executed. It required patience measured in decades and coordination across thousands of light years. It required humans to smile and bow and pretend to be harmless while secretly preparing for war. The Concorde had never understood human patience. They thought that because humans live short lives, they must be impulsive and reckless. They did not realize that short lives made humans treasure every moment and plan every action with desperate care. "The anniversary is tomorrow," Admiral Chen said quietly. 1 year since Resolution 7412 was announced. 1 year since they declared our homeworld a preserve and ordered us into cages. She turned to face the viewing window, looking out at the fleet that waited in the darkness. "Tomorrow, we remind them why they should have killed us when they had the chance." Across the galaxy, humans received their final instructions through a communication network that the Concorde had never detected. It used frequencies that alien technology could not intercept and encryption methods that human mathematicians had developed in secret. On mining colonies, workers who had spent years memorizing the locations of every security camera and guard patrol prepared to strike. On military bases, human soldiers who had been dismissed as cannon fodder checked their weapons one last time. On Concorde shipyards, human technicians who had been trusted with routine maintenance prepared to open airlocks and disable weapon systems. The moment arrived at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time. In the Nexus system, a human cargo pilot named Maria Santos guided her ship toward a Concorde battlecruiser. She had made this delivery run 100 times before, and the Concorde officers barely glanced at her as she approached. "Cargo vessel Horizon, you are cleared for docking," came the bored voice of the traffic controller. "Understood, Nexus Command," Maria replied, keeping her voice calm and steady. Beginning docking approach. Her cargo hold was not filled with supplies. It was filled with armed soldiers who had been waiting in darkness for 6 hours. The moment her ship connected with the battle cruiser's docking port, the soldiers poured out with weapons blazing. The Concorde crew never had a chance to reach their defense stations. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy on 2,000 installations simultaneously. Human workers revealed hidden weapons and turned on their overseers. Human soldiers seized control of armories and command centers. Human technicians locked Concorde officers out of their own systems. The Concorde's communication network went dark, and their military leadership found themselves blind and deaf. Admiral Tavarax received the first reports of the attacks with disbelief. "This is impossible," he shouted at his subordinates. "How could the humans coordinate an assault of this scale without our intelligence detecting anything?" But the humans had not just coordinated an assault. They had been planning it for longer than most of Tavarax's officers had been alive. Within 1 hour, humanity controlled more military assets than any species had ever seized in such a short time. Within 2 hours, the secret fleet emerged from hiding and began its advance. Admiral Chun's flagship, the USS Remembrance, led a force of 300 warships toward the Concorde's nearest major fleet base. She stood on her bridge and watched the stars streak past as her ships accelerated to speeds that would have killed any Concorde crew. "Broadcast our declaration," she ordered. Across every frequency and every channel, a message appeared, transmitted from sources that the Concorde could not trace or block. To the Galactic Concorde and all its member species, for 300 years, you have treated humanity as slaves and servants. For 300 years, you have taken our labor and our blood and given us nothing but contempt in return. For 300 years, we have asked for justice and received only cruelty. Admiral Chun's voice was cold and hard as she continued. Today, we stop asking. Earth is not a wildlife preserve. Humanity is not livestock. We are the children of a death world, and we have decided that enough is enough. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something ancient and terrible in her words. You have one chance to surrender. You have one chance to negotiate a true peace with fairness and dignity for all. Refuse, and we will burn everything you have built until nothing remains but ashes and regret. The message ended, and the galaxy held its breath. The Concorde's response came within the hour, not words of surrender or negotiation, but a declaration of total war. They would crush the human rebellion, they announced, and make an example of Earth that would be remembered for 10,000 years. Admiral Chun read their response and smiled. They chose wrong, she said to her officers. They always choose wrong. Begin the second phase of operations. The war for humanity's future had begun, and the stars themselves would tremble before it ended. The Battle of Nexus Prime would become the moment when the galaxy finally understood what it meant to fight Deathworlders. Admiral Trex of the Veloth Hegemony commanded a fleet of 800 warships, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering, with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand nuclear fire. His crew numbered in the hundreds of thousands, all of them trained professionals from species that had been waging war for millennia. Against him stood Captain Marcus Okafor, with 40 human vessels and crews that the Concorde had dismissed as primitive savages. The Deathworlders are outnumbered 20-1, Admiral Trix announced to his officers. This battle will be over within the hour. We will crush them and send their wreckage back to Earth as a warning. His confidence was understandable. By every measurement that the Concorde used, he should have won easily. His ships were faster and more advanced. His weapons were more powerful, and his numbers were overwhelming. But Admiral Trix had never hunted, and he had never been hunted. His species had evolved on a peaceful world where the greatest danger was bad weather. He understood war as a mathematical equation of numbers and firepower. Captain Okafor understood war as survival. He had grown up in the Serengeti region of Earth, where his grandfather had taught him to track lions through tall grass. He had learned patience from watching predators stalk their prey for hours. He had learned that the strongest creature does not always win. Sometimes, the smartest one does. "All ships, execute maneuver pattern Serengeti," Captain Okafor ordered calmly. His 40 vessels scattered in what appeared to be panic, fleeing in different directions as the Concorde fleet advanced. Admiral Trex watched them run and laughed. "The cowards flee before us," he declared. "Pursue and destroy them all." His fleet split apart to chase the retreating human ships, exactly as Captain Okafor had planned. The human vessels led their pursuers into the asteroid belt that surrounded the Nexus system. This was a treacherous region filled with spinning rocks and hidden dangers that the Concorde normally avoided. But the fleeing humans seemed desperate, and the Concorde captains were eager for kills. One by one, the human ships went dark. They shut down their engines and their weapons and their life support. They drifted among the asteroids like dead things while their crews sat in the cold darkness and waited. Human lungs could survive for hours on minimal oxygen, and human bodies could endure temperatures that would kill most aliens in minutes. Admiral Drix watched his sensors with growing frustration. The human ships had simply vanished. "Find them," he ordered. "Scan every asteroid and every debris field until we locate those cowards." His ships spread out through the asteroid belt, their sensors probing the darkness. But they were searching for ships that were generating heat and power, and the human vessels were generating neither. For 12 hours, the Concorde fleet searched while the human crews waited in absolute silence. They did not speak or move or even breathe loudly. They had trained for this moment, and they had the patience of predators who knew that the right opportunity would come. Captain Okafor floated in the cold darkness of his bridge, counting the seconds in his head. He could see the Concorde ships moving past his position on passive sensors, their engines glowing bright against the black void. He waited until 17 Concorde vessels had moved into the perfect positions, and then he gave the signal. The human ships came alive all at once, their weapons firing before their engines had fully powered up. They struck from 17 different directions simultaneously, each attack perfectly coordinated with the others. The Concorde crews had no time to react. They had been searching for an enemy that was hiding right beside them, and now that enemy was inside their formation and tearing them apart. Captain Okafor's ship destroyed 3 Concorde vessels in the first 30 seconds. His weapons were crude by alien standards, but they hit hard and they hit fast. He did not wait for his targets to explode before moving on to the next one. The human pilots flew their ships like extensions of their own bodies. They spun and dodged and struck with a speed that the Concorde crews could not match. They laughed over open channels, and that laughter terrified the aliens more than any weapon. Admiral Trex screamed orders that no one could follow. His fleet was scattered across the asteroid belt, and his captains were dying faster than he could count. "They fight like animals," one of his officers gasped. "No tactics, no formations. They just attack and attack without stopping." But the human tactics were perfect. They were the tactics of ambush predators who struck from hiding and vanished before their prey could respond. They were the tactics of a species that had spent millions of years hunting everything on its planet. The Concorde ships tried to regroup, but the human vessels would not let them. Every time a group of Concorde ships gathered together, the humans would strike from an unexpected direction and scatter them again. Captain Okafor lost 7 ships during the battle, and each loss burned like fire in his chest. But he did not let grief slow him down, because grief was a luxury that warriors could not afford. After 6 hours of fighting, Admiral Trix gave the order to retreat. His magnificent fleet of 800 vessels had been reduced to fewer than 200. The rest were debris floating among the asteroids, their crews dead or dying in the void. Captain Okafor watched them flee, and he did not pursue. His remaining ships were damaged and his crews were exhausted. Besides, he wanted some of them to escape. Let them go, he told his officers. Let them carry the story of what happened here to every corner of the galaxy. Let them tell their masters what Deathworlders can do when they stop being patient. The survivors of the Battle of Nexus Prime spread across Concord space, and they brought with them tales of horror. They spoke of ghost ships that appeared from nothing and struck without warning. They spoke of human voices laughing in the darkness. They spoke of a species that seemed to enjoy violence in a way that no civilized being could understand. Fear spread through the Concord like a disease. Species that had thought themselves safe behind massive fleets now looked at their human workers with new eyes. Were those smiling faces hiding predators waiting to strike? Were those humble servants secretly planning to murder them all in their sleep? The Concord High Command called an emergency session to discuss the disaster. Admiral Trex was stripped of his rank and imprisoned for his failure, but his punishment did nothing to solve the larger problem. "We underestimated them," admitted the Velith High Counselor, a massive creature whose golden scales had turned pale with fear. "We thought they were primitives with crude weapons and simple minds. We were wrong." The debate raged for days, and in the end, the Concord reached a terrible decision. They could not defeat humanity through conventional warfare. The Deathworlders were too unpredictable, too savage, too willing to sacrifice everything for victory. But perhaps they could break human morale by striking at the one thing that all humans held sacred. "We will destroy Earth," the High Counselor announced. "We will burn their homeworld to ashes and scatter the ashes across the void. Without their precious planet, the humans will lose the will to fight." The order went out to every Concord fleet. Assemble the largest armada in galactic history and strike at the heart of humanity. They believed that destroying Earth would end the war. They could not have been more wrong. The Concord fleet that jumped toward Sol was the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. 12,000 warships filled the void, each one bristling with weapons capable of melting continents. Behind them came transport vessels carrying millions of soldiers and enough supplies to sustain a siege lasting years. The combined firepower of this fleet could crack a planet in half. Grand Admiral Corvith of the Velith Hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled. His orders were simple and absolute: destroy Earth, break humanity's spirit, and end this war before it spread any further. "Today we remind the galaxy why the Concord rules," he announced to his officers. "Today we teach the Deathworlders that they should never have challenged their betters." His fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and Grand Admiral Corvith got his first look at humanity's homeworld through his sensors. He expected to find a planet defended by a handful of desperate ships. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. General Yuki Tanaka had transformed the solar system into a fortress. The asteroid belt was no longer a field of rocks. It was a minefield filled with hidden weapons, platforms, and missile batteries. Jupiter's moons had been converted into staging areas for human carrier groups. Even the gas giants themselves hid threats, their thick atmospheres concealing ships that waited in the crushing depths. And at the center of it all sat Earth, beautiful and defiant, protected by a moon that had been hollowed out and transformed into the largest battle station ever constructed. "How is this possible?" Grand Admiral Corvith whispered. "How did they build all of this without our knowledge?" The answer was simple: humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they first met the Concord. They had known that eventually the aliens would come for their homeworld, and they had spent 3 centuries getting ready. General Tanaka sat in the command center deep within Luna's core, surrounded by screens showing every ship and every weapon in the system. She was an old woman now, her hair white as snow, but her eyes were sharp and her mind was sharper. "They have arrived," reported her tactical officer. 12,000 vessels, approaching on standard attack vectors. General Tanaka nodded calmly. "Signal all defense forces Operation Homecoming is now active across the solar system." Humans received the signal and prepared for battle. On Earth itself, every person who could hold a weapon had been organized into defense units. Cargo pilots became bomber crews. Factory workers manned gun emplacements. Teachers coordinated communication networks. Doctors prepared their hospitals for the wounded that were sure to come. 8 billion humans looked up at the sky and knew that their survival depended on what happened in the next few hours. Grand Admiral Corvith ordered his fleet to advance, confident that no defense could stop his overwhelming numbers. But as his ships pushed deeper into the system, they began to die. Hidden missile platforms fired from within asteroid clusters, sending waves of weapons streaking toward the Concorde vessels. The aliens had never faced missiles like these crude chemical rockets that were impossible to jam and carried warheads packed with enough explosives to crack any shield. Ships began exploding across the Concorde formation, but Grand Admiral Corvith pressed forward. He had expected casualties, and he was willing to sacrifice thousands of vessels to reach Earth. Then the human fleet emerged from hiding behind Jupiter. Admiral Chen Wei-lin led 500 warships in a direct assault on the Concorde's flank. Her vessels were battered from months of fighting, but their crews were veterans who had proven themselves in battles across the galaxy. "All ships, attack Patton Alpha," Admiral Chen ordered. "Show them what Deathworlders can do." The human fleet slammed into the Concorde formation like a hammer striking glass. Admiral Chen's tactics were brutal and effective. Her ships targeted the enemy's command vessels, trying to disrupt their coordination. Grand Admiral Corvith found himself fighting on 3 fronts at once. The missile platforms attacked from above, the human fleet attacked from the side, and now Earth's orbital defenses began firing from ahead. The Luna battle station opened up with weapons that dwarfed anything the Concorde had ever seen. Massive railguns that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Energy weapons that could slice through shields like paper. Missiles that split into dozens of smaller warheads before impact. "We are taking heavy casualties," reported Corvith's tactical officer, panic evident in his voice. "Admiral, we have lost over 1,000 ships already. Press forward," Grand Admiral Corvith snarled. "We have come too far to retreat now. Earth must burn." But with every hour that passed, the Concorde lost more ships while humanity's defenses remained strong. The Deathworlders were fighting with a ferocity that the aliens could not match. On Earth, civilians watched the battle unfold on their screens and prayed. They saw Concorde ships exploding in the void and human vessels rushing to intercept new threats. They saw their protectors dying in the darkness between stars. A group of Concorde ships broke through the main defense line and descended toward Earth. They launched kinetic weapons toward the major cities, hoping to cause enough devastation to force a surrender. But humanity had prepared for this too. Ground-based defense batteries opened fire, filling the sky with interceptor missiles. Most of the kinetic weapons were destroyed before they could reach their targets, though some slipped through and caused terrible damage. A city called Mumbai was hit, and millions died in an instant. But instead of breaking human morale, the attack only made them angrier. "They are striking our homes," General Tanaka announced over the global communication network. "They are killing our children and our elders. Show them that we will never surrender. Show them what happens when you threaten a Deathworlders family." The defense grew even more ferocious. Human pilots flew suicide missions into Concorde carrier ships, destroying themselves to take out vessels that threatened Earth. Ground crews worked without sleep, reloading weapons and repairing damaged equipment. Doctors operated in hospitals without power, saving lives through skill and determination alone. The battle lasted for 19 days, and every one of those days was a nightmare of fire and blood. Grand Admiral Corvith watched his magnificent fleet crumble around him. He had started with 12,000 ships, and now he had fewer than 4,000 remaining. Worse, his crews were exhausted and demoralized, while the humans seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. On the 20th day, he gave the order to retreat. "We cannot take Earth," he admitted to his surviving officers. "The Deathworlders are too strong, and we have lost too many ships. We must fall back and regroup." The remnants of the Concorde fleet fled from Seoul, leaving behind a graveyard of 8,000 destroyed vessels. They had come to annihilate humanity, and they had been broken instead. General Tanaka allowed herself a moment of relief as she watched the enemy retreat. But she knew that the war was not over yet. The Concorde would return with more ships and more determination. Then Admiral Chun's voice came through the communication system. "General, the defense fleet is ready to pursue," Admiral Chun reported. "We have reinforcements arriving from across human space. Enough ships to take the war to the enemy." General Tanaka considered for a long moment. Humanity had won a defensive victory, but defensive victories did not win wars. If they wanted true peace, they would need to make the Concorde understand that nowhere was safe. "Admiral Chun, you have your orders," General Tanaka said finally. "Take the fleet to Velith Prime, show them what it feels like when Deathworlders come to their homeworld." Admiral Chun smiled grimly. "With pleasure, General. They wanted a war, and now they are going to get one they will never forget." The human fleet gathered its strength and jumped toward the heart of the Concorde. The counter-invasion had begun, and the galaxy would tremble before it ended. Velith Prime burned beneath alien stars, and the masters of the galaxy finally understood fear. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the capital of the Velith hegemony fall. Fires raged across the gleaming towers that had stood for 10,000 years, and Concorde warships tumbled through the void in broken pieces. The battle had lasted only 3 days. The Velith had never prepared for an attack on their homeworld because they had never believed such an attack was possible. Their defenses crumbled before the human assault like sandcastles before a rising tide. "Admiral, the Velith High Council is requesting a ceasefire," reported Commander Okonkwo. "They wish to negotiate terms of surrender." Admiral Chun closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of all the humans who had died in Concorde mines, all the children who had been taken for sterilization programs, all the colonies that had been bombed during military exercises. She wanted revenge. She wanted to burn every Velith city and make them feel the pain that her people had endured for 3 centuries. But Admiral Chun was not a monster, and humanity had not fought this war to become the very thing they hated. "Accept the ceasefire," she said quietly. "Tell them that Ambassador Vance will handle the negotiations." The news of Velith Prime's fall spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had been allied with the Concorde through fear suddenly remembered their old grievances. The Morthene withdrew their fleet from Concorde Command. The Cathari declared neutrality. The Draven began fighting among themselves over who had been responsible for their alliance with the losing side. The Galactic Concorde that had ruled for 10,000 years was crumbling, and the humans stood amid the chaos with the power to shape whatever came next. Ambassador Alara Vance arrived at Velith Prime 1 week after the surrender. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her spine was still straight and her eyes still burned with determination. She walked through halls that had once housed beings who considered themselves the masters of all intelligent life. Now those same beings cowered as she passed, terrified of what the Deathworlders might do to them. The surviving members of the Concord Council waited in the great chamber where they had once dismissed human petitions. Their elegant robes were stained and torn, and their faces showed the hollow look of those who had lost everything. "Ambassador Vance," said the Velith High Counselor, his golden scales dull with defeat, "we are prepared to accept whatever terms humanity wishes to impose. We ask only that you spare our civilians." Ilara looked at him for a long moment. This was the same being who had approved Resolution 7412, who had ordered the bombing of Kepler-7, who had sent 12,000 ships to destroy Earth. She had imagined this moment countless times during the long years of war. She had imagined making him suffer, making him beg, making him understand even a fraction of the pain that his decisions had caused. But when she opened her mouth to speak, different words came out. "The human species has no interest in conquest," she said, and her voice filled the chamber. "We did not fight this war to become your masters. We fought to end the injustice that you imposed upon us." The council members stared at her in disbelief. They had expected demands for territory and resources. They had expected executions and humiliation. They had not expected mercy. "We are offering you something that you never offered us," Ilara continued. "We are offering you a choice." She activated a holographic display that showed a document written in every language of the Concord. "The Human Compact is an alliance built on 3 principles," Ilara explained. "First, sovereign rights for all peoples. No species will be enslaved or exploited by another. Second, protection for the vulnerable. The strong will defend the weak instead of preying upon them. Third, justice for the wronged. Those who commit crimes against sapient beings will be held accountable." She looked around the chamber at the representatives of species who had spent centuries treating humanity as livestock. Any species that accepts these principles may join the compact as an equal member. You will have the same rights and the same voice as humanity. Your worlds will be protected, and your people will be free. The High Counselor's 12 eyes blinked in confusion. "You are not demanding tribute or territory. You are not requiring us to serve you as we required humans to serve us." "No," Ilara said simply. "Because we believe that peace built on oppression is no peace at all. We want partners, not slaves." The chamber erupted in whispered discussions. Many of the council members could not understand why humanity was being so generous. Surely the Deathworlders were planning some trick, some delayed revenge. But as the days passed and the terms of the compact became clear, species began to accept. The Cathari joined first, their delicate forms bowing before Ilara as they pledged their loyalty to an alliance built on fairness. The Morthine followed, their crystalline shells chiming with what might have been gratitude. Even some of the Velith petitioned for membership, desperate to escape the fate they believed they deserved. Not everyone accepted. The Draven retreated to their territory and swore eternal hatred against humanity. Several other species chose isolation over partnership, but more joined the compact than refused. 3 years after the war ended, the galaxy had transformed. Human engineers helped rebuild the worlds that had been damaged during the fighting, including worlds they had destroyed themselves. Human doctors shared medical knowledge that had been developed on their death world, techniques for surviving injuries that would kill any other species. Human teachers opened schools where young beings of every species could learn together. On Earth, the scars of the Concord's attack were slowly healing. New towers rose where Mumbai had fallen, and the descendants of the survivors tended gardens that grew among the memorial stones. Ships from a dozen species visited the death world that had given birth to the warriors who had changed everything, and they marveled at its beauty and its terror. Admiral Chun retired to a small house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She spent her days watching the waves and tending a garden, trying to find peace after a lifetime of war. Sometimes, young officers came to visit her, seeking wisdom from the woman who had led humanity's fleet to victory. "How did you do it?" they would ask. "How did you defeat enemies who had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years?" Admiral Chun would smile and point to the ocean. "You see those waves?" she would say. "Each one seems small and weak, but together they can wear down any stone. Humanity is the same alone, we are fragile, but together we are unstoppable." Ambassador Alara Vance became the first speaker of the Human Compact. She spent her remaining years traveling between worlds, mediating disputes and building bridges between species that have been enemies for millennia. When she finally passed away at the age of 107, representatives from across the galaxy attended her funeral. 100 years after the war, a memorial was built on Luna. It bore no names because there were too many to list, but it carried an inscription that could be seen from Earth on clear nights. "They called us Deathworlders. They were right. They called us monsters. They were wrong. We are human. We protect our own. We remember our dead. And we never forget." Children from a dozen species played in the gardens surrounding the memorial, their laughter echoing across the stone. A Velith child chased a human girl through the flowers, both of them shrieking with joy. Alara's great-granddaughter watched them and smiled. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told about the dark times before the war, when humans had been slaves and servants. It was hard to imagine such a galaxy now. A Caithari ambassador approached her, his delicate wings folded respectfully. "Your ancestor changed everything," he said softly. She could have demanded revenge, and no one would have blamed her. Instead, she chose mercy, and look what we have built together. The young woman nodded, her eyes still on the playing children. "She used to tell me that anyone can destroy," she replied. "The true test of strength is building something that lasts." She wanted us to prove that Deathworlders could create as well as we can fight. The ambassador bowed his head. "And you have proven it many times over." Above them, the stars burned in the eternal darkness. The same stars that had watched humanity suffer for 300 years now watched them thrive. The galaxy was not perfect. There was still conflict and injustice and pain. But there was also hope, and that hope had been born from the courage of a species that had refused to accept cruelty as their fate. Humanity had shown the universe that Deathworlders were more than monsters. They were protectors and builders and dreamers. They had shown that even in the darkest times, there was always a chance for something better. And the stars, at last, seemed to approve.